The actual hole is to fit a bulkhead fitting. So as the tank fills up from rain or water changes, the surplus water will overflow out the back of the tank, and I just happen to have this stormwater right there from the side of my shed, and so I will plumb the overflow system straight into that stormwater, and that'll take the excess water away. The actual water in the tank is it's never ever going to fill any higher than the level of that overflow. That keeps a constant water level. It means I've got a constant amount of a dry wall around the perimeter of the tank, and that will prevent the turtles from actually getting too close up to the edge and being able to climb out. So what I'm going to use to actually plumb the overflow through the wall of the turtle tank is a bulkhead fitting. And this is pretty much a standard bulkhead fitting that you'd find in most plumbing supply stores and larger hardware stores. And it's a 2-inch or 50mm bulkhead fitting. It comes with 4 pieces: through piece itself, which goes on the inside of the tank and through, 2 rubber gaskets, and a locking nut. Some people call them tank fittings because they're used in rainwater tanks and boats. So basically anywhere where you want to have a connection through from the inside of the tank to the outside of the tank without leaking of the water, well, only through the plumbing that you've installed, you'll use a bulkhead fitting. To properly install bulkhead fittings, you should ensure that you've got one of the gaskets on the through fitting, just like that, and that piece actually goes inside the tank and then goes through to the outside. That way, this rubber gasket is stopping the water from getting down and tracking alongside the thread. Water can only go through the actual plumbing. Then on the outside of the tank, you'll install the other rubber gasket and the actual locking nut. I've just finished drilling the actual hole in the back of the tank at between 750 and 800 above water level, and that's what I meant by not wanting to get water tracking along that bulkhead thread and contacting the plywood. You can see I've got the actual timber itself exposed where I've actually gone through the wall. I don't want that timber getting wet and to rot. I'm not 100% certain if I get a complete seal with that grit that's on the wall, and so that's where I want to use the silicone. This is always a really nervous bit. I've just actually filled up the tank to the appropriate water level, which, as I mentioned before, is dictated by the overflow at the back there. And we're obviously just doing a bit of a leak test here, but this always makes me nervous for some reason. Seeing that much water go into a tank for the first time, and I've been anxiously looking down the line of the tank to see if there's any bowing, but there's not. Tapping on the glass, not the glass, but just seeing how stiff these braces are, and they've picked up a little bit of stiffness, but they actually, they're not like a guitar string, that's for sure. And this guy down here is dead straight, so there's no bowing as such, and there's no water leaking as such, with the exception, of course, the water that's coming out the back from the overflow. And here's the other thing we find out when we do a leak test, that our driftwood here still needs to soak a bit. So it's not quite fully waterlogged, and it's actually floating. So I'm not going to touch that, because I think that will sink down within the day, and then it should rest back down in its original position. So I'm going to leave this tank now for a couple of days, just to sort of settle in, let the driftwood sink down, let any tannins continue to leach out of the driftwood, and then I'll drain the tank completely. I've got some aluminium shards on the inside there to suck out with the wet dry, and then I can complete the aquascaping with the stones, the river sand, and the planting. So here we have one very green tank. So what a debacle here, eh? That looks pretty atrocious. This is the case of me filling up the tank, testing for water leaks, making sure there's no bowing in the top bracing of the tank or the top line of the glass, at the correct water height. And I did so gradually. I was hoping that the water would actually waterlog the actual driftwood as it was gradually increased over a course of about a week. But at one point of water depth, that top log just went dong, and up it came. I'm left with a tank which holds water, which is great, with no bowing, which is also fantastic. So the actual structure of the tank and the soundness of the waterproofing is spot on. I'm left with driftwood that's floating at the moment, and that previous aquascaping that I did, that log jam setup, I'll have to redo. I'm also left with green water. Brand new tank. I've got very little biological activity. I've got brand new organics going into it, and I've got a huge amount of light, and all that's created is a bloom of waterborne algae, which makes the water go green. All right, so what I'm up to now? Where am I at now with the giant turtle and rainbow fish tank? And believe it or not, I've actually got some turtles coming from another keeper in the next couple of weeks, so I'm hoping I can resolve this issue. I need to wait for the wood to settle, to soak, to become waterlogged, so it can sink to the bottom, much like that piece there, and then I'll drain all this water out and I'll rescape that log jam. I'll install the bottom river stones as a substrate, and in the areas I'm going to plant with the eelgrass or the Vallisneria, I'll install more than likely a river sand and maybe a clay layer underneath that for the Vallisneria's roots to get right into. I've also installed a bit of a test UV clarifier or sterilizer. So I've got a little water line, and this is just really rigged up for experimental purposes only. So she's not pretty, but we're just seeing if it works. I've got my line in, I've got my line out. That's my water flow, so it's not massive. The water flow rate is dictated by what you're trying to achieve with your ultraviolet sterilizer. So you need very slow rates for parasite control of fish, and you can use faster rates for the control of waterborne algae or green water. This unit is a second-hand unit. It was lying around the shed being unused. I pulled it apart, cleaned it up, checked all the seals, and just rigged it up here temporarily to see if it'll have an effect. So we'll keep track of that over the coming days. There's an indication of the coloration of the water. See, I installed the bulkhead, and I've just popped a little strainer on there so that any fish won't get washed over when we have a water change or we have excess rain. And that bulkhead I've just plumbed in the rear of the tank to this 50mm DWV PVC, and that I've just tapped into my stormwater. Hey guys, it's Adam here, the Australian aquarist. If you're into all sorts of... Hey guys, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to the Australian Aquarist YouTube channel, and we'll do all sorts of things, fresh, salt and pond. DIY projects, collecting, exploring, renovating old fish ponds. See you next time.